All right. Hi, guys. First of all, I miss you all. And I wish I was actually talking to you, seeing your faces, your facial expressions, body language. I feel a little bit awkward talking to my computer, but it's okay. We'll jump in anyways. So for my lesson, I'm centering it around a text called Superman and Me by Sherman Alexie. It's a short story, and I actually was introduced to this in my practicum site. And so I sort of have taught this lesson before, but not really. I revamped it quite a bit to fit the parameters of this particular assignment. But yeah, so instead of actually teaching you as if you were my students, because we'd be reading a short story for like all of the 5 to 10 minutes, I decided to just give you like a rundown of what I would do in class. So to start it off, I would have students come in like normal, take their seats, get their textbooks, get all their materials that they need. Obviously, no big deal, just a normal class. And then before starting this lesson, I would sort of just take the temperature of the room or just know your class well enough, because with the short story, I want it to be read aloud. And if your students are a little bit rambunctious and they need to like focus on their listening skills, I think it'd be really useful for the educator to read the text aloud. But then if your class is pretty quiet and needs to work on their speaking and reading skills aloud, I would definitely try to like have them popcorn the text or whatever, every paragraph, break it up with a new reader. So along the way, there's a few stop and read points, which I'll show you in just a second. So I have this worksheet created. It'd be double-sided. I'd hand it out before we actually start reading. So stop and write notes. I'll explain a little bit more later, but I have some questions at certain points in the text that I would want them to write down answers to. And then on the other side, there's this graphic organizer, which is kind of cool. In one column, you have answers, so you would answer these questions, or the students would answer these questions. After we've read the whole text, they'd answer these questions. And then this cite part, they would actually find evidence in the text to show that their answer over here is founded and actually has some proof towards it, and just practice their citation skills as well as like relating their own ideas to the text and then creating meaning out of it over here. What should readers take away sort of gets at theme, which we'd be talking about later. So my practicum teacher actually used this sort of setup quite a bit in his class, so students were comfortable with it, and I liked it too. I kind of liked calling it the ACT strategy, so answer, cite, takeaway, and yeah, that's that. So that would be answered at the end of class, and then this would be periodically throughout the lesson. As far as my content standards go, obviously I'm secondary English. This lesson was meant for a 10th grade classroom, and it was based around an empathy project. So we were trying to have texts where students could practice building empathy with others and just relating to others and being more open-minded. And so anyways, that's where this sort of lesson would fit in, or did fit in my own experience. So the students should be able to draw conclusions about a text, citing textual evidence, as you saw before, inferring, all that good stuff, using appropriate text for themes. We'll talk about that later. And then analyze like a structure of the text. It's definitely important to know why the text works in the way it does. And so yeah, that's that. I have the link to the text. Again, I'm not going to actually be reading it to you. I'll just give you sort of the rundown right now. So Sherman Alexie was raised on an Indian reservation, and he refers to himself and to other Native Americans as Indians. So that might be something to talk about with your class, just like language and how it's used in the story, and how you might use it a little bit differently when you're talking about it as a person who's not part of the group. But anyways, I digress. He was raised on an Indian reservation, Native American reservation, and always knew that they were like different. In school, they were treated differently than the white kids, and just it kind of goes through the trials and tribulations of growing up on a reservation. But then, of course, as any good feel-good story does, Sherman Alexie overcomes this, becomes a great writer, and now empowers other young Native Americans who live on reservations. And so, yes, it's definitely a good read if you have a chance to read it. So the first place I would stop is right after the first paragraph. Alexie talks about living on a reservation, and it's important for students to know what a reservation is, right? So at all these stop and write points, they would be using that sheet that I showed you before, and I would just give them about a minute to stop and write and not talk. I want to make that very clear to the students that we're not discussing things yet. We'll have time to do that later on. Just write down your ideas. And, some students might not be sure what a reservation is. And what I would say to them is just to use their best context clues to see what they can glean from the information as they go. And we'll get to it later on. Just, use your best guess. It's not going to be graded for accuracy. You just want to get them engaged with the text as they're going along. The next one, newsflash, Alexi uses paragraphs as a metaphor in the story. He talks about seeing his life in paragraphs. His mom's a paragraph, his dad's a paragraph, all that stuff. So just having students think about, that sort of metaphoric device and how it works and what impact does it have on the reader as far as, thinking again about that, how the text is structured, why it's important to put things in a certain way, and what that gives to readers and the audience, how it makes it interesting. And then this last one, there's only 3 stop and writes, and this one refers to prodigy and oddity. So these words are both kind of used at the end, and how, some Indians, Native Americans on the reservation are considered prodigies there, but when they go to school, they're oddities. And this sort of juxtaposition is really interesting, and it gives students a chance to practice their vocabulary skills. Some students just might not know these words, and it's important to point them out. And then, so we'd finish reading the text, and after we finish, the best way I know to open up a conversation, honestly, to a group of 10th graders is literally asking them what happened in the story. Chances are some of them might be confused. Some of them might be uncertain that they even knew what happened, even though they probably do. It's just nice to have the reassurance that they do know what they're talking about, and that will get them to talk about a little bit more of deep things later on. And so, recount the plot with them, see what happens, see what they remember what happens in the story, and then move on a bit. And I would move on to this point about reservations. So as I believe I mentioned before, this would be used in an empathy sort of project where you're trying to build students' empathy and how they relate with others and being open-minded and all that good stuff. I hope I said that in this recording. To be honest, I've done this recording a bunch of times, so I don't remember if I said it in this one or a different one. But anyways, yes, this is all about empathy, and so learning about people who are different than you is super important. And having this background on reservations is also super important. So as the first stop and write question talked about, like, what is a reservation? Why are people living on them? Give the students a bit of background, a bit of context for what's happening. Show them that Sherman Alexie is not an old writer. He's not writing in Victorian England. Like, this is a modern day American writer. And so it's important to note that. And it brings them a little bit closer, the students a little bit closer to the text, and helps them, I think, relate a bit more. So empathy, great. So then at the end of class, once we've had discussions about their stop and write points, I would want to talk to them about the different tactics that Alexie uses in the class, or in the text, and what they thought, what their answers were. It's nice that they will have those written answers to help guide them with their spoken answers with the class. It gives them a little bit more confidence that they won't just be raising their hand with nothing in mind. They have a bit to go off of. And then the students should work on their graphic organizer for the rest of class. They can discuss their answers with other students, and it will be useful in future discussions because I would plan on building off of this sort of point, especially with the whole empathy thing. Tying in a bunch of different texts is really important when talking about it. And then, sorry, I feel like I'm talking like a mile a minute, but I want to fit it all in. For my exit ticket for class, so after the students are working on their graphic organizer, I would want this to be emailed to them. So my school is actually 1-to-1, so I kind of went off of that for this lesson as well, just working in a 1-to-1 classroom. These are my exit tickets. So there's 5 questions listed, and I would want students to answer this first one for sure because theme is really important. We would have talked about that in our like full class discussion about theme over here. So I definitely would want them to answer that, and then I want them to pick 2 more out of the 5, so or out of the 4 remaining, I suppose. So ultimately, they'd answer 3 questions, this first one, and pick 2 more, either this one, this one, this one, or this one. Obviously, you guys can read, and I don't have to read it to you. And then I'd want them to share any comments and concerns. So this exit ticket gives them a bit of student choice to feel a little bit more in charge of their education, I suppose. And I definitely want to see what needs to be clarified because it is a lot to take in just after one class period. Like, that's a lot of stuff packed into 50 minutes, an hour, whatever you have for in class. Um, so yeah, that's what I would do with my lesson. As far as accommodation goes or differentiation, in my actual classroom, I had a student who was almost all the way blind. So she wasn't completely, but more than partially blind. And so for students like her, or anyone who would need a digital copy of the reading, obviously they would have that. For students who might not have as strong as a vocabulary, if they're like a bit more emerging, I think that would be really important to note some or highlight some of the difficult words in the text, and give them a definition off to the side just so that they're able to keep up with the rest of the students. For some students who don't stay on task as much, you definitely want to walk around the room, especially when they're doing their stop and write. Kind of stand by them. Just giving your presence, your proximity is really important. Yeah, so that I think is everything. I hope I didn't bore you too much with this overview instead of actually teaching you, but I'm confident that you all get it. Okay, I miss you all. Bye.